for the project. I'm going to go over this quite a few times throughout the semester, just to keep you focused on what are the requirements. Again, it's a very short semester, so you need to be very focused on this. I would suggest that you start working on this right away. The most important part is be able to choose a particular domain and stick with it. There's very little wiggle room to be for you to halfway through this and decide, oh, you're going to do something else. So hopefully it'll be something that is of interest to you, some topic that already you're passionate about. So basically, the project consists of creating an application around a web application around some domain that interests you. Okay, you would need to find an API from which a free API that would allow you to access and query data about a particular topic that is of interest. Here are some of the minimal requirements that we have for the project. I think they're generic enough that it should encompass. They're very broad. That should encompass fairly. I hope that 80 or 90% of what you might want to work on. There's always a 10-20% that falls out of this boundary that we've created. And we're willing to work with you and perhaps negotiate if you want to, do one feature instead of another. Okay, but the idea would be to maintain the same level of complexity. Okay, so let's go through to some of these. So the first one is that you should be able to identify two types of roles. Actually, for the undergrads, it's only one. It's only one. For the graduates, it's two. But for the undergrads, it's generally only one. So one type of role, and then the user interface would be specific to that particular user type. Okay, user role. So for instance, if you have two human users, if it's an online store, you might think maybe there could be a seller and a buyer. If it's in a restaurant, you can have a cook, a waiter, a delivery boy, maybe a receptionist, a manager. If it's sports, your domain, then you might have a particular player, director, or fan, or spectator, all presumably using your application to participate, to create a community, to share information, to collaborate, to have some social networking interaction, right? Using your web application, and depending on the role. You'll have different user interfaces, right? So if I'm a buyer, my user interface might allow me to create an online store, add products, create different product descriptions, quantities, prices. If I'm a seller. If I'm a buyer, right, I would have a completely different user interface that would not allow me to change any of the descriptions, no quantities, no prices, right? So that's where the challenge resides, right? That you need to be able to identify somebody in a particular role, and then modify your interface for that particular role, right? But not only the user interface, you also not only do you need to identify the person and identify them and authenticate them, you also need to authorize them, right? Are they authorized to do certain things? And it's not only modifying the user interface that would allow them to do certain things, but not others. But also any APIs, any public APIs that would be available to modify data, those need to be protected as well, right? Depending on the role. Okay, if you're not authenticated, authorized to do certain things, not only should you not be able to navigate to certain places, you should not be able to, send HTTP requests that would, programmatically change quantities or prices or things like that. So the interface adapts to the user. Beyond the human user, there is an admin role. Okay, and the admin role should have kind of like God powers, right? They should be able to do everything that all the other users do, but also they should have some restricted place where they can go, navigate, and administer users, change or modify somebody else's profile information, remove users, ban users from because they're misbehaving. So all the various CRUD operations. CRUD is an acronym for being able to create, read, update, and delete user objects. Okay, their user interface perhaps doesn't need to be perhaps as pretty or as markety as an end user. These are all end users, right? These human users, the sellers, the buyers, the coaches, directors. These are all end users, right? They're outward-facing users. They're outside of the application of the as opposed to an admin is facing inwards, right, to a corporation, right? They have access to all the information, all the databases, all the networks inside of a corporation. So their user interface is more functional driven. Perhaps uses a lot of tables, right? A lot of tabular data. It doesn't have to be as pretty. It should still, be responsive, and it should be polished and finished, but not necessarily as markety with lots of colors and whatnot. They're not interested in that. Presumably, the admin user might be a power user, right? So they might be okay with long lists of data, right? To scroll through long list of users, long list of pieces of data, as opposed to an end user. It would not be appropriate, right, to have, to bombard the user and overwhelm the user with lots and lots of data. Typically, an end user, we use several wizards where we show pieces of the information across several pages, just so that we don't overwhelm the user. So admins are power users. So definitely consider your audience of who's looking at your application, and consider what they would find useful. Okay. An anonymous user, this meaning somebody who is not logged in, right? Who you don't know who they are, doesn't count as a type of user. Okay. So your application should support some functionality for someone who's not logged in, right? So for instance, if I go to IMDb, or I should still be able to search for movies and read reviews and look at the cast and look at some artwork without having to log in, right? The application should only force me to log in if they need to remember or know something about me, right? If I want to create a post or a comment, or I need to like something, or something that the application needs to know who I am, then it should force me to log in. Okay. But other than that, the application should be open and available. Obviously, protecting what's private information and whatnot, yes, should not be publicly available. So anonymous support should be there. Excuse me. So as I mentioned earlier, multiple roles. Here's where I say that graduate students are required to have at least 2 roles, or like a student and a faculty, like a buyer and a seller, whereas undergrad's only 1 role. And each user, for each user, you need to identify what are the various use cases, right? What are the things that those users want to accomplish, right? Depending on your domain, and so those actions that those users might want to accomplish are typically related to the domain objects that they want to manipulate. Okay, whether those objects are movies or songs or restaurants or whatever. Users or sellers or buyers or fans, they would like to be able to create these things, remove these things, update these things, whatever domain objects you decide. So you need to identify what those operations are, and depending on the size of your team, you can have up to 3 team members in a team. Okay. But it's not required. You can go it alone. All right. If you decide to go it alone, undergrads are required to support the following roles: an admin role, okay, an anonymous role, and 1 additional role. Right, whether you're buyer, seller, student, faculty, whatever role that is. Okay. But if you have an additional team member, so if you have 2 team members, you have to add an additional role. Okay, it's just to compensate for the added complexity, for the added capacity of someone joining your team. Okay, to just make it proportionally more complex every time, every new team member that you add to your team. Make sense? All right. Graduates just have just an additional role than undergrads. So yeah. So if you have a three members in your team, you'll have the 3 required roles plus 2, right? Role 2 and role 3. Make sense? Everybody okay? Okay, so you need to create a data model for the various things that you need to store in your database, right? Certainly, you'll need a data model for your user. Here you'll create the various pieces of data that every type of user will need, right? Presumably, you might have a high-level person that captures all the common attributes of all users. So presumably, first name, last name, username, password, email. So things like that. And then you might have a separate class or separate entity that might capture information about a specific type of user. Okay, so you'll need to create classes and the schema for storing that information. Then you'll need to capture the model for any domain object that you want to store information, right? Whether those are teams, restaurants, movies, songs, whatever it is that you need to store in the database, you'll need to create a data model for that. These are non-human things that you want to store in your database. Recipes, sports team, tasks, fishing trips, products, categories, whatnot. Then you need to also data model the relationships that you have between users. Okay, so a user might follow another user. A user might send a message to another user. You might have an employee manager relationship, right? So you need to model those kinds of relationships. So here's, for instance, I give you examples. User follows a user sends a message. So you need to model those relationships. You also have to model relationships between users and their domain objects, right? Users might like a movie, so where the like is the relationship that relates users and a movie. A user might order certain products, right? So again, orders creates a relationship between users and those products. You also need to create relationships between domain objects and domain objects, right? So for instance, you might have a domain object that can encapsulate other domain objects, like maybe a playlist. A playlist, right? It captures several songs in that playlist, right? Or you have favorite locations or favorite events or favorite whatever, right? That allow you to encapsulate, have one-to-many or many-to-many relationships with other domain objects. So here's an example where you might have a category of many products, a fishing trip where you caught many fish, a team that has many players, a blog that has many posts, a portfolio that has many stocks, right? So those are 2 types of domain objects, right? Portfolio is a domain object, yes, and a stock is a domain object. So you have a one-to-many or many-to-many relationship between them. You need to have at least one-to-many relationship, okay, where again a playlist might have many songs in it, and at least one many-to-many relationship. Okay, maybe you have a review where you have a user reviewing many books and a book being reviewed by many users, right? So at least one many-to-many. Yes, I think those that have taken 3200 at least, this should be familiar jargon. If some of these jargon is not familiar to you, I'll go over it throughout the semester. Come to my office hours. We can do a refresher on database and data model in general. But it will become apparent as we go forward. Here's a very, very generic diagram that tries to capture all the required relationships and types of objects or classes. Here we have an abstract person that you have 2 types of users that are inheriting from that base person class. Everybody familiar with UML class diagrams? Some of you, not all of you. Okay. This is just a formal diagram that is very common in engineering for capturing the various types of information. But everybody's familiar with object-oriented programming in general, yes? So these boxes basically just represent classes, right? Classes in a software system. So here this is a person class, and you have maybe a seller type of user and a buyer type of user. They both inherit from person. So you have base attributes here that are inherited from both. Here's an association between these types of users. Maybe a user is following another user, or a user is sending a message to another user. Here you have a user-to-user association. Here you have a relationship between a user, a one-to-many relationship between a user and a domain object. So, for instance, a user might have many playlists. Each playlist might have many songs in it. Okay. There might be a many-to-many relationship between the domain objects. You might have a hierarchical, recursive relationship between a domain object, like for instance, products instead of products, like categories of products, right? These self-referencing allow you to capture that kind of hierarchical relationship between objects. Again, this is very, very generic. It's not. I don't expect that you have all of these in any one particular project. And obviously yours would be much more detailed. Okay? But this is very, very high level, generic. Here's a couple examples on what some of these might be. Here's a buyer and a seller. They're both persons. They both can send messages to each other. Buyers sending messages to sellers and vice versa. You have buyers following each other. Perhaps they found each other as participating in a community, in a social networking site, and you have domain objects over here, products, where you have a many-to-many reviews. So buyers create many reviews to many products, and each product can be reviewed by many buyers, right? Then a seller can create many stores. Each store can have many products. And products can be organized into several hierarchical categories of products. Okay, where the branches of this tree will be the various categories, and the leaves will be the actual physical products. Yes. Right. So this is just a quick example. These would be additional. You would have attributes that would describe your entity, your class. With the right data type of what you might want to capture for each of the properties for each one of these classes. Okay. Again, we would expect that in about 3 weeks, we would expect a diagram such as this from you, where you know just to see that you have been doing some progress. You've been thinking about how to model this. I point out a couple of tools that you can use to create these diagrams. There's a couple of free ones out there. Here's yet another one. Here's one where you have kind of like a faculty student in a university. The students and faculty both being persons. They both be able to send messages, perhaps through Piazza. And here you have a faculty that might be one of the authors of several courses, but that same course could be authored by more than one faculty, right? So here you have a many-to-many mapping between the two. You also have a faculty be able to teach a particular section of a particular course. So a course has many sections, right? And a particular faculty can teach a section, but a section could be taught by several faculty. Up there you have a student that could be enrolled in several sections, but one section can have many students enrolled in it, right? So again, these are the types of diagrams and complexity that we would expect from your projects. Again, I think it's the third week we would expect that you have nailed down fairly to some fair amount of confidence what these diagrams might look like. Okay, and here's yet another one. You have here artists and curators participating in an application that allows artists to post their types of art, and that art could be hand drawings, it could be photos, it could be audios or videos or written types of art. So one artist can have many art pieces, and each one of them could be of different types. So they have a collection of art pieces, and they could organize them into many portfolios, right? So an artist could create many portfolios. Each portfolio can have many art pieces associated with that portfolio, and they can also exhibit their art and participate in an exhibition that is curated by a curator in a gallery. So a curator can curate many galleries. Each gallery can have many exhibitions, and that exhibition can have many art pieces hosted by the artist. Okay, maybe this is a little bit too complex, perhaps. And again, for the undergrads, if you're just doing it alone, there's only one of these, right? Only one user is required. Okay, you're welcome to create other types of users, but at least one. Right? But if you're in two, then yes, you need two types of users, two roles. All right. So it's not fair if you start in a team of two, and you do a fair amount of work, and halfway through it you decide to split and say, okay, well, we can't think of another user, so let's split. And at the end of the semester, you give me the same the same products or the same project. That won't be accepted. Okay, make sure that again, there's very little wiggle room. Choose your partners carefully, and please bring it to completion. Feature requirements. So there should be a homepage, and that homepage should be your landing page to your project. It should look spectacular. It should entice the person to come in and use your website, your product, your application. It should perhaps show some activity in the website. Folks that just recently joined, or recent reviews that somebody has posted recently. So it should show that there has been some activity in the website. Okay, some default content, especially if I come in and I haven't logged in, right? It should show something that kind of explains what your website is. If you're Google, you can you can just get by putting just a single search bar. Everybody knows what that search bar is. But until you're Google, please put some information there on how do I use your website. What do you want me to type in that search bar, right? What is your website about? Okay. So you're just not just one big picture and that's it, right? So please be explain what's going on. Also, you need to support login and registration. You shouldn't force me to log in, right? I should be able to use a fair amount of the features without having to log in, without having to register. Certainly until you need to know who I am, then you force me to log in. Registration, certainly you should support logging in using username and password, and also logging in with at least one social network, right? Either Facebook or Google or LinkedIn or any one of them. We'll go over how to do that. Typically, what we do is that we ask you to do one for the assignment. Choose to do it with Google on the assignment, and then do Facebook with on your project, or vice versa, whatever you choose. Okay. There should be a somewhat of a profile page that would allow me to see all my my private information. The profile might allow me to decide what is public and what is private. That other folks in the network might see publicly without having to log in. It's up to you what you want, how private or how public you want to make it. Also, the profile page should also give me access to everything that is related to me. So if I am following someone, or if I like a movie, or I reviewed a restaurant, or whatever, right? Anything that is related to me, that is stored, that has some relationship to me, should be accessible from somewhere, right? A good place would be the profile page, right? In my profile page, I could list, right, all the restaurants, all the movies that I like, everybody I'm following, people that are following me, right? So that's a good place to put it. You might decide to put it elsewhere, but that's one good place to put it. So from the profile page, I should be able to get to everything else that is associated to me, okay? So I would have maybe a list of other users, a list of the items that I'm following, bookmarked, liked, reviewed, whatever, right? Maybe a brief title, maybe a small thumbnail, and I should be able to click on any one of them, right, and navigate to the original item, right? Whether I can navigate to somebody's profile that I'm following, or a movie that I reviewed, or a restaurant that I went to that I liked. It should navigate me back to the details page. I'll get to the details page in a minute. The details page works in tandem with the search page. So there should be some search functionality that should allow me to query some API, whatever API you choose, right, for your particular domain, that you should be able to search for some freely available database out there. Okay, where you put the search is up to you. A lot of folks like to put it, on the top right of the header, or maybe the very first page on the home page, or they might navigate to a dedicated search page. That's up to you where you put it, right? But once I search and I click on search, it should show me a list of all the search results that match my criteria. Your search you could decide that your search is not just an input field. It could be maybe a combination of input field and some drop downs. Okay, if you have very structured data that you might want to provide some filters for that. That's up to you how you want to search it, right? Depending on your particular domain. The search result should provide a very summarized search result that meet that criteria. You could make it paginated so that you could have the first 10 and then next 10, 20, 30, 40 items, right? Or some of you might decide to do like an infinite scrolling, right? As you scroll, right, it goes and fetches the next 10, the next 10, the next 10. It just keeps on filling, kind of like Google does. But that's up to you how you wanna do that. But the search results should be rendered as a summarized list, right? Maybe a little thumbnail, maybe a little title, okay, maybe a sentence or so that describes that item. And when I click on that, it should navigate me to a details page, and the details page should show me more information about that one particular item. Okay, so both of them are requests to some outside API, right? Somebody who's hosting this data. So the first one is that the first search. Typically, the search result will be an array of objects that meet that criteria. Yes, which you will render. The second query in the details page. Typically, it'll be, hey, I want more details about this one particular item, right? So it'll be a second query to an API, providing some unique identifier, right? Some IMDb ID or some ID that was given to you by the first query, right? And then you'll get some object, some JSON object that will allow you to create more detailed information, maybe more pictures, maybe the plot of a movie. Maybe an address for the restaurant, some more information, right? Maybe the director, the cast, or whatever it is, right? So the details page will include a lot of at least maybe the first half of the details page will be all dynamic from a remote server. It will be if somebody liked the restaurant or the movie or whatever, right? That particular item, right, will need to live in your database somewhere because you need to remember that somebody liked that restaurant, right? You'll need to create those relationships in the database, right? So and so likes whatever it is, okay? You need to remember those kinds of things. So your details page will be a mixture of, half of it will be dynamic from some remote server, right? And half of it will be some information that you generated, right? That somebody likes this, somebody commented on it, somebody reviewed something, right? In your user space, right? Some social networking feature, like people following each other, or people friending each other. Definitely you need to decide on a web service of where you're going to fetch this data. A good place to start is programmable web. Programmable web is just a directory of tons and tons of APIs that are out there. Most of them provide data either in XML format or JSON format. or RSS feeds. There's quite a few formats that are supported. I would try to stick to JSON. Okay, so you can search here for a topic, and we'll show you the the various APIs that might support that. So whether through Weather Channel is here, Yahoo Weather is here, and you can click on each one of them and then see what do they support, right? What kind of so they support XML, right? They support RESTful APIs, and they give you what's the website that documents this API. Right? I would get this started now. This is the riskiest part of the project. Okay, getting a hold of these APIs. Some of these APIs you need to apply for them. You need to give a small description of what is it you're going to do with this API, and most of them come back, reply to you immediately or within a day. Some of them might take a week to respond, whether they're going to give you an API key so that you can use these APIs. So I will get started right away, trying to identify what APIs are out there that interest you. Okay, again, I would stick to the JSON APIs, right? But XML would work as well. If it's XML, there's additional work that you'll need to do on the server side to parse it and convert it. If it's JSON, there'll be zero extra work that you need to do, right? Because you already have a JavaScript server, a JavaScript client that will allow you to do this. All right? Yeah. So this is the riskiest part. So I would get started right away, right? Of finding what it is here that interests you. Yeah, and one of the milestones when you're working with a project is for you to create a couple of experiments of you trying out these APIs, making sure that you can query, right, and that you are receiving data, that you can render it, that you can look up detailed information about a particular item. So get started with that. User management. So as an admin, all right, there should be a couple pages that allow me to implement the user admin roles of creating users, modifying users, and whatnot. Styling requirements. So styling. There are several things that we're going to be looking to make sure that your website is responsive, that it's using good practices, that it's using good white spaces, that it's readable. So, for instance, this is a programmable web. One of the things that we're going to do when we get to your application is start looking at it at different screen sizes. Okay, and as the screen changes, right, we're always going to make sure we're looking for to see if the website or web page at any point breaks, right, it becomes unusable. All right. So, for instance, as I'm making this smaller, you'll notice that the headers are resizing, right, and that they're reaching a point where they don't fit anymore. Okay, and then they become smaller and smaller and smaller. See that? So they need to be responsive and adapt to the screen size. Always maintaining nice white spaces along the left-hand side and the right-hand side. This nice, there's this equal spacing between the right and the left, right? So they're the same spacing gutters. There's the gutters here between these. Spacing, I think things are centered. Okay. Things are very well labeled. That's this good contrast between the foreground and the background. So we're all going to be looking for those things. Okay. Also, we want to make sure that as this resizes, that you don't have weird wrapping, or the things that just resize and push things to a side, or maybe overlap other content. Right. So just be careful. Always resize your page and look for things that break. For instance, right here. See that? See what's happening there, right? It doesn't fit, right? And it's just wrapping, right? There's not enough space, and it just added a new line. So you would lose points for that. Okay. The intention was that this didn't fit, and it would become smaller, right? But the threshold that they have is too small, right? And they didn't calculate that right. Okay. Again, see that wrapping, that should not occur. Okay. So again, we're looking to make sure that when you make it small. Again, you have nice spacing on either side. Everything's centered, and you're supporting small screens. Don't only look at it in small screens. Always look at it in a broad range of sizes. Okay.
You mentioned that we have
Yes. Yeah, typically you focus on designing this. Okay, this is the hardest part to do. What happens is that if you start with a big screen, typically especially us developers, we're power users. We don't mind lots and lots of data on a screen, but end users typically would mind when you have tons of. So if you start with such a huge canvas, we tend to just try to fill every single piece of white space that's out there, okay? And typically things start to have, it's not quite sure which piece is more important than the other, okay? So mobile first forces you to identify what is the most important thing that I want to show here, okay? And as I have more space, then decide, ooh, now that I have more space, maybe I could add a side on the right-hand side, okay? But that side on the right-hand side might not be as important, right? So it's okay to just not show it, right, and just collapse it into a menu, right? So mobile first forces you to think, start thinking about these things, right? What is the foremost important, and then what else could I show if I had a bigger screen, right? So it's changing from a 1 column to a 2 column, and as it becomes bigger, it becomes splits it into 3 columns, right? So yeah, so definitely you should start with mobile first, right, and then decide what else you want to show in the bigger screens. All right, and we'll take a look at how to do that using Bootstrap. Great. So make sure you're looking at padding, margins, justification. So you have text justified to the left, numbers justified to the right. Don't just make everything centered. And careful when you use tables. Don't use tables only for what they were originally meant for tabular data. They weren't meant for layout. So don't use tables for layout. Also, another thing that one thing that happens here. Notice that this is mobile friendly, but notice that this is allowing us to pinch and zoom. See that? The pinch and zoom is a legacy support when websites were not phone friendly, right? Were not responsive, and they would render on a phone with a really tiny screen with really tiny fonts, right? So mobile phones try to render a web page as if they were rendering on a desktop, right? And to be able to fit a 1280 or a large screen on a small screen, such a small format, the font would be unreadable, and obviously you would have to be able to pinch and zoom. But notice that this is already phone friendly. Yes, it is phone friendly. So the pinch and zoom should not be necessary. Okay, so you should disable it. You should disable it because your page should be already phone friendly. Okay, so you should not need to use pinch and zoom. Actually, it just breaks the page, right? The pinch and zoom. They should have disabled it, okay, because it has no meaning over here, okay, on a small screen. There was another thing. Also notice that even if I'm pinching and zooming, I only have I can only scroll up and down. See that? It doesn't give me a scroll bar at the bottom. Yes? Scroll bars at the bottom should be avoided. Only in a very restricted cases you should provide a horizontal scroll bar. For instance, if you're showing a data table that is too wide, right, you should be able to scroll the table left and right, but not the entire website, right? Only that one table. Or if you have an image, maybe it's okay that you're allowed to pinch and zoom the image, right? But not the entire website. Yes. Also, it would be okay to scroll left and right, up and down an image that you zoomed in, but not the entire website. Make sense? Okay. So we're going to be looking for those things. What else? I think that's it. Best practices. All throughout the semester, I'm going to be sprinkling good practices. I'm going to be driving this, repeating this over and over throughout the semester. There are best practices in the industry, how to organize your large websites. For small websites, with just a couple of dozen of pages, it doesn't really matter. But if you're working on a large team, we have another 10, 20, 30 developers, and they're all working the same source control. Certainly, we want to be able to organize our files in a particular way that is predictive, that everybody knows where to find things. Also, naming convention becomes very important. It just creates a data model for you in your head of where to find things if you need to debug something or fix something. Yes. So definitely, we're going to decide on a file structure early on, and we're going to follow it throughout the semester. Right? You'll find similar things when you go out working out there. A team will decide on a particular file structure, and everybody should adhere to that structure. Also, some best practices on making sure we have we're dealing with different contexts. Immediately invoked function expressions to be able to create modules, reusable modules in JavaScript. Yes.
Question about styling. Did you mean that we can only use curators for styling?
No, certainly not.
Extra features like carousel for pictures or things like that.
Yeah, no, please. If you feel more comfortable with other libraries, other great libraries, maybe materials or foundations or any other that you prefer, please feel free to use it.
The assignments that only have to do.
Yeah, in the assignment, please just Bootstrap because that's what we're going to be grading throughout the semester. But in the project, feel free to use other libraries. The thing is that the TA might not be as able to support you, so you might be out there. But please feel free to use those. So we'll show you all the best practices all throughout the semester. Me coding here, but also in the assignments. And please follow the same. We would expect you to follow the same in your projects. We're going to be doing a lot of centralization of web services. So, yes. Sure. Yeah. Great. That'd be awesome. Yes. I'll come back to that. Yeah. What else? Let's see. Deliverables. So throughout the you'll see throughout the agenda, I've listed here a couple of milestones that we would expect you to be at a particular week, right? So by week number 2, you should be at milestone number 1 for the project, okay? And then several milestones there, project 2, project 3. We're not going to grade these right away. We're going to grade this at the end, right? But this is for you to measure and pace yourself of where you should be. So, for instance, by the end of next week, the first milestone would be for you to come up with a description of what is it that you're going to be doing. What project are you going to be working on? Okay. So we would expect by the end of next week, in a full semester, it would be by the end of the first month, right? Here is by the end of the first 2 weeks. Right. Again, everything has been condensed. Everything is half the time what that would normally take. So again, by the next week. End of next week, hopefully you'll have a description, a 300 to 500 word description. These are not set in stone. It's only for you for us to be able to measure that you are indeed making progress toward your project. Okay, we're not going to enforce this. The TAs are going to look that you are actually working on these things. We'll start pestering you if you're not here at this milestone. We want to discourage you from leaving this to the end. Okay? You're just gonna go nuts if you're gonna just postpone this to the end, right? So by the end of next week, please come up with a problem statement, what you think you're trying to solve, some very high level ideas on how you're gonna solve this. Try to identify what are the types of human users that are going to be using this. Okay. Try to describe what they're going to be, how they're going to be using your website. It is okay for this to change later, okay? We're not going to hold it against you. It's very typical that this will change. We expect this to change as you progress through the semester. It's just that we want you to push you, start to think, and towards progressing towards your project. Also, for each type of user, think of the things that they would do, right? Also, what are the types of domain objects that you think you're gonna be modeling for your project? For milestone number 2, We would expect that. So that's 3 weeks from now, right? That would be what, a month and a half. But anyway, in 3 weeks, we would expect that you have a first iteration of what a class diagram might look like, right? Of starting to model your users, your domain objects, what relationships you want to capture. Okay. So use one of these free UML diagram tools to come up with a preliminary class diagram design. Yes. And showing us what the users and the domain objects and the relationships. Where do you think those one-to-manys and many-to-manys relationships are going to look like? Again, it's preliminary. It's only to see that you're progressing towards your project. That you're not leaving this to the end. That you want to identify any risks early on, especially that API. That API is the most important thing. Okay, because the API. Since you don't own that API, somebody else owns it. You can't, it gives you whatever it gives you, right? So you're constrained with whatever that API allows you to do, and it's okay to design your application around those constraints, right? If the application doesn't allow you, if that API doesn't allow you to do something, well, just don't do it. It's okay not to do that. Just become familiar with what is it that it allows you to do, and design your application around that. Okay. So I would do that very early on. So by the 4th week, we would expect you to be familiar with your API, that you can start trying it out and do some queries. So I'm going to be asking you to create a couple of experiments where you can query data from the API. You can display it. It doesn't need to look beautiful, pretty. It just needs to look functional, right? You can query, you can display some object, right, that comes back, maybe in JSON format, and that if you select one of them, you can query a particular object and display details about that one particular object. Yes, and we'll show you how to do that. It's fairly easy how to do. We're going to demystify all of that, and it's just that you have to choose what domain it is. All right? Okay. So for each one of these milestones, we're asking you to create a wiki entry, a page in your wiki, right? And name them either project for the first one, design for the second entry, then your for the third one, I think we call it POC, yeah, proof of concept, and those you'll document a little bit, right? You'll give us links to where your experiments are, so that we can go in and use them. The fourth prototype is starting to flesh out what your application is going to look like, right? So start thinking about how you're going to do the profile page, right? How you're going to capture those relationships of someone having liked the movie or having liked the restaurant, and then displaying those kinds of things in the profile. You're starting to think about logging in and registration, and obviously you're welcome to use any and all of the code that we'll be working on using the assignment. So hopefully you'll be able to reuse some of those controllers, some of those services, some of those HTML content, CSS, all that, reuse it and refactor it for your purposes. Okay. So that's the intention, is that you reuse as much as you can within reason. Then the last 2 weeks is just basically development, right? Hopefully you'll be already in a cadence of implementing this and just bringing everything together. For we're going to ask you to explain to us, how do you want us to test your application? Okay, how do you want to be graded? So obviously we're going to ask that to make sure that whatever it is that we're testing your application, that you have to show that it fulfills the requirements, right? That a user can follow another user, or I can like a restaurant, whatever it is. We're going to ask you to give us very detailed, step-by-step testing procedure for us to go in, log into your application, use it here and there, and tell us how do we, what do you want us to do to test your application? Yes?
For testing, do you want us to just do a user testing interaction, or do you also want like a testing suite for that?
No testing suite. But if you want to do unit tests, that'd be great. But no, unit tests are not required. Yeah, only behavioral from a user's point of view. So yeah, and so we'll ask you to create these accounts. Someone with an admin, or Alice, Bob, Charlie, Dan. As many roles as you need to create, right? If you're just working on your own, you'll just need to create admin and Alice. Okay, but if you're a team of two, you'll create admin, Alice, and Bob. Okay, and in your instructions, you'll tell us Alice searches for the following restaurant. Alice now clicks on the third restaurant. Now Alice creates a comment. Now Alice navigates to this user's profile page, and they see this and that and the other. Yes? Okay? We're not going to try and break it. Okay? We'll peruse and follow your instructions. We'll also randomly try things out. Okay? But it's your chance to tell us how you want us to test your application. But these are the types of testing that we're asking you to do on how a user can be related to another user, how a user searches for things, how a user creates some relationship with some domain object, and whatnot. Okay. Optional. You can create a 5 to 10 minute video, YouTube video, and post it and provide it in your homepage or your wiki and of you using your application. Right. This would be a nice opportunity for you to showcase your application, have evidence that this at some point worked. There's always one or two folks that somehow their application stops working right when we're going to grade it. If you have some evidence that this at some point worked, at least locally, that would be obviously we won't be able to give you full credit, but it is evidence that this did work at some point. Your project needs to be accessible from your homepage and needs to be available obviously on GitHub. Here's a rubric. This is a little bit outdated. I need to update it, but a lot of this rubric is us looking at your source code, making sure that you follow good practices and that you actually did the work. All right. What else? Any questions? All good. All right. All right. Let me stop this.